Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Wednesday, August 11th, and we're breaking down this 11-game main slate that we have over on DraftKings today, and I'm thinking this should be a pretty solid one. We got some decent pitching, we got some decent stacks to talk about, so I'm definitely looking forward to breaking this one down. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already, and if you want to take that one step further and become an official member over on Patreon, link is down below in the description for that, but you do get access to a lot of extra content that I do find quite valuable. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the pitching, then move on to the bats. We don't have a lot of options here, but I think we have some solid guys to talk about and some pretty good matchups as well. And I'll tell you right now, my plan is to spend up for Corbin Burnes and Kevin Gausman in the majority of my lineups, especially if you are playing cash games today. I feel like that's the safest route to go. I think, in my opinion, they're by far the best pitchers on the slate, and they both draw some pretty strong matchups as well. And I realize it's over $20,000 combined in pitching, but I was playing around with some lineups. There's some cheap bats to work with, and you can still fit pretty good lineups with those two together. And DraftKings has made it way too easy all season long to play expensive pitching, so I don't think we'll have any issues with that. But we'll start out with Corbin Burnes, $10,300. He's the most expensive pitcher on the slate, and I think it's deservedly so. He's been awesome all season long. Now, I will say he's been a bit hit or miss lately, where he does have some kind of clunker games mixed in, but he's still one of the best pitchers in baseball so far this season, and he gets a great matchup versus a watered-down Cubs team. They're missing, obviously, Javier Baez, who is a free strikeout, so it's like you're kind of happy and sad about that because the guy has a lot of power, but he does strike out a ton, so you kind of miss that. But it's nice getting the power of the lineup. So no Javier Baez, no Chris Bryant, no Anthony Rizzo. Yes, there's Rafael Ortega, who's at the top of the order, and Patrick Wisdom has some power, but I'm not scared of this lineup whatsoever. I'd say the only downside here for Corbin Burnes is the weather looks like it's going to be optimal hitting conditions, and if you guys don't know how Wrigley works, the way that stadium is built, when the wind's blowing out, it's a huge boost for the bats, and when it's blowing in, it's a huge boost for the pitching. And as of right now, looks like it's going to be blowing out around 15-20 miles per hour. It's also going to be hot and humid around 90 degrees, so that's not the greatest thing for Corbin Burnes. But it's still a bad lineup. If I had to guess, the Cubs are probably going to have a team total below 4 here, maybe 3.5. If it was blowing in and stuff, it'd be like probably in the upper 2s, but unfortunately that's not the case today. But you got to hit the ball first for that to work, and I don't really think that's going to be happening too much here against Corbin Burnes. And if we're looking at his numbers on the season, they've been excellent. A 2.35 xFIP, 2.6 SIERA, 35% K rate, walk rate below 5%, 12.5 Ks per 9, giving up less than a 100 ISO, 50% ground ball rate, a 24% hard contact rate, and less than half a homer per 9. So look, Corbin Burnes here a lot, and if he's not the highest scoring pitcher on the slate, I would be pretty shocked today. Then dropping down to Kevin Gausman, $9,900. He gets a great matchup here versus Arizona. I was a little bit worried about Alex Wood last night because the Arizona Diamondbacks are actually not terrible versus left-handed pitching. Like, they're kind of weird where they really struggle versus righties. They don't really have much power whatsoever, but versus lefties, they're actually somewhat okay with a 171 ISO and a 98 WRC plus and a 320 WOBA. Not great numbers, but they're actually somewhat okay versus lefties, but versus righties, they really struggle. Only an 80 WRC plus, 134 ISO, close to a 25% carry. They actually do walk quite a bit, but I'm not scared of this lineup whatsoever. Vegas isn't either. I think they have a team total of 2.92 here. He's got a 70% chance for a win. 6K prop. Gausman's been great all season long. He's got a K rate over 30%, ERA at 2.31. Now the xFIP and SIERA about over a run higher, but he'll be just fine versus Arizona. And it's a pitcher-friendly park in San Francisco, so I like Kevin Gausman quite a bit today. And if you're looking for a GPP pivot here, we have Alek Manoah at $9,100. He feels a bit expensive, but the kid's been good so far this season. He gets a pretty good spot here versus LA, because outside of Shohei Ohtani, you're not really scared of anybody in this lineup, and they only have a 4 implied team total against him. He's a decently heavy favorite at 62% chance for a win. Similar K prop to Kevin Gausman at 6. And if we're looking at his numbers on the season, the ERA is really good at 2.5. Now the xFIP's above 4, the SIERA is close to 4, but I like that 28.2% K rate. Does have some issues with walks, but not a ton of power given up, and he's a pretty solid pitcher. And the LA lineup is pretty bad right now. I know it's kind of a hitter-friendly park in LA, but at $9,100, if you're looking for a pivot off the chalk today, because Gausman and Burnes are going to have a ton of ownership, so Alek Manoah should go under the radar. And if you're looking to just get some leverage here, I actually think he's a pretty solid option with a good amount of strikeout upside. Then Skubal at $6,300. So fair warning, I do have interest in Baltimore stacks today, and you're going to see me talk about them in a little bit. But at $6,300, even if he gives up a couple homers, like let's just say he gives up 3 to 4 runs, if he can get 6 to 7 strikeouts here, that's fine. At $6,300, if he's going to give up runs, That's okay, but the strikeouts have to be there. But he's got a 6K prop over in Vegas, which is right on par with Kevin Gausman, with Alek Manoah. And, the 25.5% K rate is the thing I like here. The problem is he gives up a ton of power. It's a very hitter-friendly park in Baltimore, so you're playing with fire here. If you roster Skubal, 2 homers per 9. And the Orioles are actually pretty solid versus lefties. Like, any single time the Orioles play a lefty, I usually have interest in that stack. So fair warning, at the same time I like him, but at the same time I like the Orioles stack as well. Plus they can do damage against the bullpen, so not everything has to happen here versus Skubal. But versus lefties this season, they got a 177 ISO, a 110 WRC plus, a 324 OBP, a 330 WOBA, only a 21.5% K rate. So be careful with Skubal. He's a tournament option only for me, but at that price point, if he can get 5, 6 plus strikeouts with only a couple runs given up, I think point per dollar wise, he could actually be a pretty solid play today. And the first team I want to talk about here is the Milwaukee Brewers. I kind of mentioned this with Corbin Burnes, but it looks like we're going to have some really good hitting weather in Chicago tonight. Wind blowing at around 15 some miles per hour. It's going to be hot and humid, around 90 degrees. Probably going to be a little bit lower than that when the game gets started and stuff, but still pretty hot and humid. And you can definitely sign me up for a lot of these Brewers today. Jake Arrieta's on the mound today, which is a pitcher that I always pick on quite a bit. He does not really have much strikeout upside. He's really bad versus lefties, but you can use pretty much anybody versus him. But Colton Wong leading off, $4,200. I think that's a great play there. On the season, he's batting 295 with a 169 ISO and a 118 WRC plus. Willie Adames has been amazing ever since going to Milwaukee. Christian Yelich is nearly $6,000, and as bad as he's been this year, it's kind of hard to stomach that price point, but raw points wise, he does look like one of the better plays on the slate today. Love lefties versus Jake Arrieta. Eduardo Escobar just came over from Arizona. He's had plenty of power in his bat this season. Not a big batting average guy, but an ISO above 235. Omar Narvaez has crushed right-handed pitching this season. Avisel Garcia, prefer him versus lefties, but he still has pop versus righties. Right, Tellez is a cheap option. Let the already match up there. And Lorenzo Cain, more of just like a lineup filler there, but he's like at least a decent bat, but he hits near the bottom of the order, which I don't love. But I think all these Brewers look pretty good today. If we're looking at Jake Arrieta's splits on the season, nothing too impressive here. ERA close to 6.5, xFlip close to 5, less than a 20% K rate, about a double-digit walk rate, 232 ISO given up, and he's pretty bad versus lefties with a 40% hard contact rate. So loving the Brewers today. There's no implied team total out yet. Vegas is kind of waiting on weather. But if I had to guess, probably like 5.5 today, maybe close to 6, but big fan of all the Brewers today. And then the next stack I want to talk about is the Detroit Tigers here versus Matt Harvey. If you guys were patient enough, the Detroit Tigers came through late last night after they had that long, lengthy rain delay. And we get a really good spot here versus Matt Harvey tonight, who is one of the overall worst pitchers in baseball. I realize over the past month or so now, he actually hasn't been terrible, but I'm not going to let a small sample size like that overtake a large sample size over the past couple of seasons with him being one of the worst pitchers in baseball. So I definitely have a lot of interest here in the Detroit Tigers. The one downside I will say is that Akil Baddoo and I believe Derek Hill ran into each other last night, so they both got hurt. So I'm assuming they're not going to be in the lineup, which kind of sucks because Baddoo would be an awesome play here versus Matt Harvey. He has crushed righties this year, would have been leading off. I'm assuming that's not going to happen tonight, so the lineup will look a little bit different here, but we can use pretty much anybody and everybody versus Matt Harvey. Robbie Grossman, I prefer him versus lefties, but he's still fine. Switch hitter. Jonathan Scope's got power. Candelario, he went deep last night, less than $4,000. I prefer him versus lefties. Actually, a lot of these guys I prefer versus lefties, but it's still Matt Harvey. We're in Camden Yards, one of the best places to hit in all of baseball, especially this time of the season when it's hot and muggy. And, the bullpen for the Orioles isn't that great either. And we have a team total north of 5 today. So all these guys are pretty much in play. Obviously, it's never the sexiest team to stack, but I think that they could have a similar game to like they did last night. And then staying in the same game here, just the opposite side, it's going to be the Baltimore Orioles. And they're still in the same hitter-friendly park in Camden Yards as Detroit is. They just get a little bit tougher matchup versus Skubal, who's got some decent strikeout upside, but the guy really struggles with righty power. And this is a very, very cheap lineup. Like outside of Mullins and Trey Mancini, it's a very easy lineup to stack, and they're always like a good complementary stack with an expensive stack. So if you want to try to fit in Adames, Yelich, and guys like that tonight, it's pretty easy to just kind of pivot right over to the Orioles and get a few of those guys in your lineup to make like a cheap secondary stack. And even then, Mullins and Trey Mancini aren't that expensive either. Like they're in the low 4K range. But if we're looking at Skubal splits versus right-handed bats this season, like he's got a good K rate over 25%, but he's giving up a 270 ISO, a 350 WOBA, a 47.5% fly ball rate with a 40% hard contact rate, and 2.5 homers per 9. So the righties here are going to profile pretty well. We can still use lefties in full-on stacks, but he's definitely a little bit better versus them. He still gives up hard contact with less than a half a homer allowed per 9 innings and only a 100 ISO. But if we're looking at these splits here versus lefties, this team is not bad. Mullins is good, even though I don't have his splits listed here for some reason, but he can hit lefties just fine. But Austin Hayes, a 233 ISO. Trey Mancini, a 280 ISO. Santander, not a lot of power there, but he's pretty much the bare minimum. Unfortunately, we don't have Ryan Mountcastle right now, which is another guy that had over a 200 ISO versus lefties, but still, Urias just a cheap righty here. McKenna, Franco, Severino's got some pop versus lefties. Richie Martin, I mean, he's at the bottom of the order. I probably wouldn't play him. I'd rather play Urias for $700 more, who hits higher in the order at the same position. But I think the Orioles would be a decent contrarian stack today because I do think Skubal will have a little bit of ownership just because he's a decent cheap pitching option today with strikeout upside. But we have a team total close to 5 here. Again, same hitter-friendly park in Camden Yards, so I actually think they're a pretty decent option here, even though Tarik Skubal is not the worst pitcher in the world. He just gives up power, and I think we can definitely go home run hunting for cheap on the Orioles today. Moving on to the last stack I want to talk about, I want to mention there is some other viable options here, but I want to talk about every single team on the entire slate here. But we had the Toronto Blue Jays in a good spot here versus Dylan Bundy. He is a pitcher who had a good game last time out, but he gives up a lot of power, doesn't have the best strikeout rate. He's got an ERA around 6 this year, and we have a team total of around 5.5 here for the Blue Jays, plus they're on the road in LA, which has actually been a pretty hitter-friendly park this season, and you get those guaranteed nothing at bats as well. And all these guys pretty much rake for the most part, especially the top half of the order here. George Springer, Vlad, Simeon, Bichette, Teoscar Hernandez. I mean, these guys have been excellent all season long. Like, if we just look at their ISOs individually, it's kind of insane how good this lineup is. Like 345 ISO, 325, 249, 184, 205, and most of these guys have really good batting averages as well. You're not just sacrificing batting average for power. These guys do it all have high WOBAs. I mean, this is just a loaded lineup. Even the bottom of the order is pretty good. Corey Dickerson, Randall Grichuk, Reese McGuire, Espinal. I mean, those guys are okay, but they're not terrible either, especially if you're bringing the bottom of the order. I mean, if you're looking at these rankings, I mean, it's just an awesome offense, and they're expensive, yes. So if you want to stack the Blue Jays, you're probably going to have to pair them with the Orioles, but I don't think that's a bad thing to do on today's slate. And if we're looking at Bundy's splits on the season, ERA north of 6, xFIP around 4.5, 21% K rate, but giving up a 247 ISO, a 35% hard contact rate, and close to 2 homers per 9. And if we look at his splits compared to lefties and righties, 2 homers per 9 to lefties, and around same thing versus righties, and similar power either way. So you can use the entire lineup. They are a bit expensive, but I think we can make it work on tonight's slate, and they're in a very, very good spot in my opinion. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you're becoming a member over on Patreon, link is down below in the description for that. We got a community of over 200 some people, and it's pretty awesome. So if you want to check it out, I would highly recommend it. Obviously not being biased whatsoever there. And don't forget, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. It's just you versus the projections, and as of right now, if you use code CPENN and tell them I sent you, you can get a free money bonus up to $100, and there's some pretty soft lines that you can look at each and every single day for the props to take advantage of. So check it out and use code CPENN. And I think that's going to be pretty much it, guys. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you all in the next video.